All types of battles being fought, some for the right reasons, some for the wrong reasons, but we're all in this together. Now a friend is going to introduce a friend. Michael Olesker will introduce our headliner for the evening, Joe Nawrozki.
I was a young sports writer at the News American when I first met Joe Nawrozki. It was his first day home from Vietnam, and I was working for a saint by the name of John Steadman. I do not say that mockingly at all. The man was a saint, as Joe can validate. And Joe came into the sports office because he had started out as a sports writer and then gone off to war, where he was with the Army. He was a combat correspondent. He spent a year seeing some pretty rough time in Vietnam. And John Steadman wrote a column that was headlined, "Our G.I. Joe Comes Home from the War." Joe and I, just a few years later, became partners as investigative reporters for the News American. We wrote about things like illegal police spying on citizens of Baltimore who had done nothing wrong, but whose political views the police commissioner, Donald Pomerleau, didn't like. We wrote about charity ripoffs. We wrote about prison conditions that were horrible, particularly at Patuxent. We wrote about Joe, help me here. There were so many things. Courthouse corruption, politicians on the take. We got people indicted and convicted. And we also wrote about a kid who came home from Vietnam named Tommy Nasdor, who was in some ways a kind of a character who we came to appreciate too late in the game. He came home very, very emotionally damaged, damaged in terms of drug addiction, damaged in terms of the country not being able to cope with these kids coming home with the damage that they had inflicted on them. And Joe and I wrote about this guy, but Joe in particular. Joe wrote some stuff about Tommy Nasdor that was so haunting, so poetic, so moving, that that it's as good as anything that was ever written in a daily newspaper in America. And for years thereafter, every so often I would bump into Tommy Nasdor's parents, and they would say to me, you know, you and that friend of yours, Nawrozki, or whatever his name is, you saved our son's life. You saved our son's life. No greater honor can come to any writer. Joe Nawrozki has spent the last 40 years as a soldier, as a reporter, as a teacher, and also as a guy who has worked with homeless people out in Harford County. He is my friend, my former partner, and my brother in all but name, Joe Nawrozki.
I'm going to sit up and down. How's everybody doing tonight? Are there any veterans in the house? Are there any veterans in the house? Okay, I'm one. I was drafted in 1965. Like Michael said, I was working, hired by John Steadman in the sports department at the News American. I was going to Hopkins and University of Baltimore at night, working 6-7 days a week, and I knew that I was in a profession, in a calling that I loved. And you know, how better does it get? However, my path was interrupted by the Selective Service Commission, and I was drafted. I was a squad leader. I was a good soldier because that's the way it was. That's the way I was raised. And however, that culture calling didn't match our war. I went to Vietnam as a combat correspondent for the Army, and I did civil affairs missions up and down the Central Coast and into the Central Highlands. And what I would like to do tonight would, if you would bear with me, some of these poems are just so strong. Are there any children in here?
Just me.
In a way, and me too. And they're pretty stark. And very well they should be. Because that's war. And I don't know where I'm going to start. But I'm going to try to break it down into segments. And please remember, it is fitting tonight. It goes beyond a sofa for sale, a Frigidaire that you can pop into your U-Haul. It's a very special day. And I'm going to start out with what most of us were confronted with after we got off that aircraft and were hit by the heat, the smells, and the terror. And if I pause, I'm an emotional guy. This is called Guerrilla Warfare, and most of these poems are taken from a book, a wonderful book called Winning Hearts and Minds, War Poems by Vietnam. Veterans, one of them is W.D. Earhart, and he's terrific. And I will read this offering. And please be mindful of the kind of war Vietnam was. It's practically impossible to tell civilians from the Viet Cong. Nobody wears uniforms. They all talk the same language, and you couldn't understand them even if they didn't. They tape grenades inside their clothes and carry satchel charges in their market baskets. Even their women fight, and young boys and girls. Eventually, it's practically impossible to tell civilians from the Viet Cong. After a while, you quit trying. So, that's one you that you might not have considered before, but you quit trying. You couldn't tear yourself apart. And these fine young people coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, same thing. They were over there, they didn't know who was friend or foe. And you don't know what that does. You just don't know. Okay, this was written by a very talented guy named Basil Paquet. He was a combat medic. And it goes, "You are dead just as finally as your mucosity dries on my lips in this morning sun. I have thumped and blown into your kind too often. I grow tired of kissing the dead." And I'm not quite sure if I can get through this, which was written by, this is very controversial. This was written arguably by a combat nurse named Dusty. And I will read it because it really goes into what nurses faced for a year every day. Young bodies on almost like a conveyor belt. Faces blown away, legs gone, arms gone, souls gone. So Larry Rodman, by the way, he wrote this very telling poem, APO 96225. That was your mailing address in Vietnam. That designated where you were, where your mail would go after your folks wrote you, your friends wrote you, etc. A young man once went off to war in a far country, and when he had time, he wrote home and said, "Dear Mom, Sure rains a lot here, but his mother, reading between the lines, as mothers always do, wrote back, "We're quite concerned. Tell us what it's really like." And the young man responded, "Wow, you ought to see the funny monkeys." To which his mother replied, "Don't hold back. How is it there?" And the young man wrote, "The sunsets are spectacular." In her next letter, the mother pleaded, "Son, we want you to tell us everything, everything." So the next time he wrote, the young man said, "Today I killed a man." "Yesterday I helped drop napalm on women and children." And the father wrote back quickly and said, "Please don't write such depressing letters. You're upsetting your mother." So after a while, the young man wrote, "Dear Mom, sure rains a lot out here." Again, there are no children here, I hope. This is about poetry which captures like a good photograph. Jen, Large Burroughs, did you know of his work? Just overpowering. And these poems were written by Vietnam veterans. Certainly the books written by Michael Hurd, Tim O'Brien, Phil Caputo stood by themselves. But these were written in a time of fire, under fire, if you can understand what I'm saying. This comes from another one of those wonderful poets. "The bullet passed through his right temple. His left side could not hold against the metal. His last I am exploded, red and gray on a rubber tree." This is real, folks, and I know it's not very nice to hear on a pleasant night, but this is Veterans Day, and if more people paid attention and got outraged during this, I might not have been there. But would anyone like to do me a favor and read this poem? It's called "Hello David, my name is Dusty." I can't do it.
Tony?
Would someone? Okay, thank you. It's on the board.
Hello, David. My name is Dusty. I'm your night nurse. I will stay with you. I will check your vitals every 15 minutes. I will document inevitably. I will hang more blood and give you something for your pain. I will stay with you and I will touch your face. Yes, of course, I will write your mother and tell her how brave you were. I will write your mother and tell her how much you loved her. I will write your mother and tell her to give your bratty kid's sister a big hug. What I will not tell her is that you were wasted. I will stay with you and I will hold your hand. I will stay with you and watch your life flow through my fingers into my soul. I will stay with you until you stay with me. Goodbye, David. My name is Dusty. I'm the last person you will see. I'm the last person you will touch. I'm the last person who will love you. So long, David. My name is Dusty. David, who will give me something for my pain?
I had a dear friend, still do, her name is Diane Carlson Evans, and she was in charge of getting the Nurses Memorial built in Washington, D.C., right across from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And she served a year in Pleiku in the back hospital. She came home and could never, ever go into another operating room and see the blood. What happened was she went crazy. She had to pretend so many times that she was the mother of these young kids coming before her in a morphine haze, reaching out and saying, "Mommy, am I going to be all right?" And what's she going to say? "Sure, son, you're going to be just fine." And so many times doing that, what does that do in her sacrifice of her soul? But she worked through it, and there's a wonderful memorial statue, if you haven't seen it, in tribute to the nurses, the combat nurses of Vietnam. And there are combat nurses over yonder now, and their sacrifices are great. I always thought that they were as great as infantrymen, because what you give out didn't come back. I'm going to try to end this with some sense of irony, which is a great touch of poetry, but it's going to deal with Agent Orange. And in case you don't know what Agent Orange is, I'm going to give you a quick primer. More than 18 million gallons of Agent Orange, one of the most toxic cocktails ever shaken by the mad bartenders at Dow and Monsanto, was sprayed over Vietnam to deny the enemy hiding places, clear fire zones around airstrips and base camps. It has a haunting long life. It defoliated the jungle, seeped into the soil, the water, and hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese civilians, women and children included, have died hideous deaths from Agent Orange, mostly from cancer. Countless more suffered birth defects, as many as 500,000. And that chemical also took a huge toll on troops. They came home as young men and women. Many died. I had a brother-in-law who died at 42. He was alert, he got it, and was gone. His son told me that when they would take his father to treatment, his father would come out yellow or green. Think about that a second. It's like an unrelenting ghost. Agent Orange still appears decades after the last Huey's blades roared, pitch, lift, nose down, and took off from the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Fini. The irony? About 3 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, leukemia, from being exposed for an extensive period of time to benzene. Benzene is the most powerful component in Agent Orange. I was given as little as 3 weeks to live because it is so aggressive, and it was just caught in time. I go have my first chemotherapy session tomorrow, and I don't know how long I have. I have 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren. And my daughter raised this point: "Dad, how am I?" And I can't answer her question right now. I will, I'll try. What about my 2 grandchildren? Are they going to be sick one day from this god-awful disease? I don't know. But I'm not going to stand up and tell you I'm brave. I'm looking at this in the face, and I'm going to beat it. It's going to beat me eventually. And I'm scared shitless. But that's the way it goes, okay? My daughter came up with this last, she's been researching like crazy, and it just fits. It's 3 words. Simplicity, the bare simplicity, the unadorned. 3 words are sprayed and betrayed. Dig it, okay? If you know a veteran in your family, on your street, where you work, say thank you, okay? God bless.